second. Just gotta get a second. You can.
I gave her a 30-second leeway on 6 o'clock.
You guys ready?
Qué rico. Oh, good. So I brought my own for this.
These are also basically materials.
You know, one of the things I noticed in the MDOs, I can catch up as we go. There are no hyperlinks in the MDO online. So
Really?
you have to go to the title page and you have to go to each individual section. That's where I got this.
Kelly, you are good to start.
You're good.
You're good.
I'd like to call the Marvin Planning Board meeting of August 20th, 2024 to order. We have a quorum. We are currently missing Marcus and John. I don't believe we need any, we don't need to consider remote participation today, do we? All right, then we'll move on. If I could get a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? And adoption of the previous minutes. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at them? Are there any changes, comments, questions? Nope. And then if I could get a motion?
Motion to approve the previous meeting minutes. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so moved. Austin, would you like this time or after public comment?
We can go ahead and do now.
Okay.
So before we move on to the public comment period, we are going to swear in our newest employee, Polomi Das, as our planning technician and deputy clerk. We will go up to the mic.
The baby's all grown up.
I,
I,
Polomi Das,
Polomi Das,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and maintain
that I will support and maintain
the Constitution and laws
the Constitution and laws
of the United States
of the United States
and the Constitution and laws
and the Constitution and laws
of North Carolina,
of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will
and that I will
faithfully discharge
faithfully discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of my office
as planning technician and deputy clerk
as planning technician and deputy clerk
of the Village of Marvin,
of the Village of Marvin,
and that I will not allow
and that I will not allow
my actions as
my actions as
the planning technician and deputy clerk
the planning technician and deputy clerk
to be influenced by personal
to be influenced by personal
or political friendships
or political friendships
or obligations.
or obligations.
So help me God.
So help me gods.
Congratulations. All right, we have a public comment period. Do we have anyone signed up for public comments?
No one has signed up.
All right. So then we will move right on to our first item of discussion, discussion and recommendation of zoning map amendment 2024-2. Hunter.
All right, so if you guys recall, I mentioned this at the last meeting, and this is kind of a continuation of the zoning map amendment 2024-1 that you guys reviewed back in June. It's regarding the Weddington Chase subdivision. If you recall, there was a property owner in Weddington Chase that submitted for rezoning from SFR3 to SFR1 after the adoption of the MDO. The planning board did not recommend approval, and council followed that recommendation. Their motion failed for approval. With that being said, there was conversations that were had with that applicant, and he was able to kind of get me some information at looking at zoning all of Phase 1, SFR 2. And so this zoning map amendment would apply to all of Phase 1, which is roughly 200, there's 287 homes in Phase 1, but there's only 286 in Marvin. There's one little donut hole. So this would apply to the 286 of those. But it's rezoning it from SFR 3 to SFR 2. In your guys' packets, there's basically all the research and information that Mr. Laughlin has provided thus far, as well as some what staff has been able to also kind of review. So just kind of getting into the request or into the proposal is that ultimately, like I said, it's to rezone all of Phase 1 SFR 2. The lot characteristics differences is that, once again, it was zoned SFR 3 at the time of the adoption for the, what?
I just realized I already started the Zoom.
Oh, crap.
Recording in progress.
I'm not gonna start over there.
You missed her 5 minutes of YouTube fame.
But if you guys recall, when we were going through the adoption of the MDO process, we designated Weddington Chase as SFR 3 just due to the similarities in the minimum lot sizes and setbacks as what's on their plat. Under the old ordinance, the subdivision was all zoned RUC, which is Residential Union County, which was basically a vested district, which meant whatever's on the plat is whatever your minimum lot and zoning setbacks were. The concern of zoning them SFR 2 originally was that we did not want to create any nonconformities. With further research, all of Phase 1, there are currently 2 properties that are under the minimum lot size. Creating a non-conforming lot of record is not really a concern because these lots are already developed. The bigger concern of a non-conformity is creating a non-conforming structure. The big red flag there was that in SFR 2, the side setback's 9 feet, the platted side setbacks in Weddington Chase were 5 feet. And staff had no way to verify every single property out there to know if it was 5 feet off or greater than 9 feet in short. So that's why it was designated as SFR 3. Overall, getting into the research found, like I said, there are 2 lots that are under that. There are, from the information provided from the resident, there are 2 lots that also, I think, do not comply with the side setback, but they are roughly, I think, 7 feet off, if I recall. This is where
Sorry, can you say that again? They're roughly what off?
7 feet off the side. And so the minimum side setback is 9 feet. So that, in theory, yes, this would create a non-conforming structure. However, Article 14 gets into flexible development standards, which basically allows staff to grant a variance on those setbacks up to either 10% or 2.5 feet, whatever is greater, or 2 feet. I can't recall. I think it was 32 inches, yeah. So 2.5 feet. With that being said, those structures could then still, in theory, be conforming. The only other thing that staff is in the process of verifying is the side corner setback. The side corner setback in the SFR 2 is 21 feet, so this would be for corner lots. The platted side corner setback for, on the plat for all of Phase 1 is 15 feet. I only have 2 surveys of existing structures that I only have 2 surveys of corner lots. They do conform, however, I do want to verify that there's a total of 19 corner lots in Phase 1, and I'm in the process of verifying that. So ultimately, I'm kind of presenting this to you guys as a, first review, see if you guys have any questions, comments, feedback, and over the next month, I will be just making sure that those additional 17 corner lots do comply, or at least will be able to comply with Article 14. And if so, staff is recommending approval of rezoning all of Phase 1 to SFR 2.
Could you take us through, so I'm looking at the WC Plats PDF. on the first page, and it just says, just trying to make sense of, there's just so many different pages with similar information. 5 feet, 9 feet. Can you talk about, what's the minimum side setback right now? The 13 that do not meet the minimum lot size for SFR2.
Are you looking at the Excel?
No, I'm looking at the PDF with the maps. Plats.
So out of phase one, I believe there is only 2 lots that don't comply with SFR one. The rest of them that you see are all in phase two, and this request does not include phase two. Because phase two, when it was platted with 30-foot front setbacks, 5 feet on the side as well. And so there is most likely a whole lot, and as the research kind of shows, there would be more nonconformities created if the whole subdivision, phase 1 and 2, was rezoned to SFR2. So the 2 lots in question, and just in phase 1, are below. So the minimum lot size in SFR2 is 17,500 or 450. That's close, which is a little under half an acre. And so those 2 lots, I believe, and sorry, I'm gonna get my Excel right here. Those 2 lots in question are 16,814 square feet and 17,250 square feet. So they are under the minimum lot size, but at the same time, they would still fall in the parameters of Article 14 with the lot size dimension the lot size dimension flexibility clause.
Sorry, it's just slightly confusing because the first page of this WC Platts PDF, it says phase 1, like there's a red box, it says phase 1, 40-foot front yard setback, and then 5-foot side yard setback. But then in another place, it says it's a 9-foot side setback.
So no, so the 5-foot, that's the minimum lot sizes on the plat. So once again, when it was under the old ordinance, when it was RUC, whatever was on the plat was the minimum zoning standard, which was a nightmare for us to administer because there was 5 subdivisions all zoned RUC. On top of all those subdivisions had 2 different phases, and Weddington Chase is a prime example where you had 2 different phases with different platted setbacks. Those are the minimums. And that's why staff did recommended zoning this whole neighborhood SFR3 with the adoption of the MDO, is because without going and looking at every house or having a survey of every house, we were not sure if those structures are 5 feet off, 6 feet off, 10 feet off. And so knowing that at least 5 feet minimums, and that's what was on the plat, they should at least be 5 feet off. And so then that would not create any non-conforming structures. With the research that we have here is that there's 2 lots with the existing structures that are less than 9 feet off. But however, like I said, they fall within the 10% for allowance of the flexible development standards in Article 14. So it's really not creating a nonconformity.
So initially you said we were RUC, and when we moved over to the MDO.
Put it on screen. They're asking for it.
I'm sorry. So initially, when we started out, we were, the Weddington Chase and several others along there were RUC. So Hunter, now we're saying that we initially moved this over to SFR3 as part of the MDO, and now we have a resident who wants to change their lot.
So that was the initial request.
So as a resident of Weddington Chase, I'd like to see everybody else's signature that says, yes, they want to change here. Because if we're doing one, it should be one person. So I'm a little bit confused why, as a resident, I've never seen anything go out that says, hey, this is what we're looking to do.
So that's, like I said, this is something that staff basically discussed with the previous applicant. And so that, this is something that if you guys recall, part of the reason why it was not recommended is because it was inconsistent with the surrounding land use and zoning, just because the rest of the neighborhood would have been SFR 3. With that being said, I told him, I said, look, if we can get all the documentation and verify that it's not creating any nonconformities, from a staff level, there is no issue zoning it to SFR 2. Once again, you're not losing anything. I mean, in theory, you would be losing if your house, like I said, my justification was if your house sits 10 feet off under SFR3 and you wanted to do an addition, you could build 5 feet into the side. Now you would, that does take that away. It's my understanding, which I don't enforce HOA covenants, but that the Weddington Chase covenants says that you can't have an addition that goes on the side. It has to be on the rear. I don't know if that's true. But the applicant has surveyed a majority of the residents, and that's in the in your guys' packets in that Excel. Now, I don't have signatures or any of that, and so this is a staff-initiated rezoning. We would still have a neighborhood meeting it hasn't been scheduled yet because I'm trying to figure out how to meld all 287 plus all adjoining properties. I want to talk to the attorney on that to see if I can just meld to the property owners themselves, since it's really not impacting the surrounding property like a normal rezoning would. So I've got to clarify that with the attorney, but the property owners were going to be notified that this change was being proposed, and notify them of either the neighborhood meeting or at least notify them to come to the public hearing.
I will say that, just for consistency's sake, any of the headings, like even in this like Excel file that's made for eyes that are much better than mine, it all says platted side setbacks, 5 feet. So
that, like I said, that's the
right, but it just-
minimum platted.
but it needs to say minimum. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, well, like I
It
said,
just needs to-
this was prepared by the resident of Weddington Chase. But on the actual plats themselves, when you, like I said, this is just a generic overview. When you look at the actual plats themselves. See if I
right,
can
it's just, it's fine that it's a minimum of 5 feet, but in order to be SFR2, it needs to be a minimum of 9, so that doesn't really, it doesn't make any difference. Like, it's like, all this Excel file is saying is that it meets the standards for SFR3, so if the argument is that it makes more sense for them to be, for phase 1 to be in SFR2, I'd rather see what the actual setbacks are down that last.
Well, that's, so,
Column.
like I said, this is the reason why staff originally proposed SFR3. I can say for certain about 90% to 95% of those lots are definitely compliant with SFR2, no question. There is a handful of lots, if you're going off of GIS and looking just how the lot is configured and with the side load garages and so on, that those houses may be, like I said, between 9 and 5. Out of the surveys the actual individual lot surveys provided by the resident, like I said, 2 of the lots are under 9, but like I said, that's where that flexible development standard comes in. If they were like 6 feet, then they would be a non-conforming structure because that is out of the parameters for to comply with Article 14. Like I said, there's still some verification that needs to be done, but based off of what's been provided and kind of our research, like, I do feel comfortable that it's not going to create any nonconformities, and the ones that are created are within the threshold for Article 14 to kick in, where it doesn't actually create any type of issues there. Because if you recall, a nonconforming structure basically can't be expanded, and it also sometimes can mess with mortgage and
Yeah.
insurance purposes, and so we don't want to create those. So,
Sorry, I'm not arguing the fact, I'm just saying that if we're going to go forward, and I know a lot of the information in eScribe is for our, just our benefit with background and everything, but like the documentation just needs to state, like there needs to be, not proof, but like it needs to be documented that it's not a minimum setback of 5, that they actually do mostly meet the requirement for a minimum setback of 9.
yeah, what I
I just
can.
mean, get the documentation tight, because it's, once we're, through this process, we just need to be able to actually prove that our.
No, and I'm
that
right
our
there with
votes
you.
were like
And,
in line with.
and that's why, once again, that's why I'm not recommending that you guys make a formal recommendation tonight. Furthermore, like, what I can do is in that Excel, build on that Excel, and then go through the surveys of the individual lots that have been provided and put in that information. And like I said, there are still ones that haven't, but then I can try to go back through and locate the ones that I have noted that are potentially in question and just follow up with the resident or the property owners and see if they have a survey. Because the biggest challenge here is, once again, with Weddington Chase being annexed in, they didn't come to the Village of Marvin for zoning permits or for the original construction. They didn't come to the Village of Marvin for zoning compliance, where any neighborhood was in Marvin when it incorporated and constructed, I have final as-built surveys for almost every single lot. So I could have done something in-house like this a whole lot quicker.
Okay. Well, thank you.
So, any other questions?
All right.
All right. So,
Discussion recommendation of zoning map amendment application. My screen just flickered. 2024-3.
okay, so this is our first rezoning application submittal that's actually going from one zone to a different zone compared to the first one that we considered. The village has received an application from Mr. Thomas Vickery of 9509 Marvin School Road to rezone his property. He's got his 2 parcels from rural residential to single-family residential 1. These properties are located there in the corner, or kind of in the bend of Marvin School Road, right before Joe Carr Road. And if you recall, they have been on the market for probably about the last 2 years. I think they came off a little bit, if I recall, but they went back up. This property was originally recommended to be rezoned or to be designated as SFR1 with the adoption of the MDO. The reason behind that is because since the property was on the market, staff over that year and a half it was on the market prior to the adoption of the MDO fielded a lot of calls. Those calls about rezoning or subdividing, as well as minimum lot standards, were all based, provided to those callers, were all based off of the R Marvin residential standards. And it was unclear if the property was under contract or not, and so that's why it was recommended to be SFR1. When it left planning board and went to council, there were a few properties that were then designated to just be zoned R rural residential and not SFR1. This was one of them. So the property owner had his property for sale, was once again going off the information from the R Marvin residential under the old ordinance, and contacted the village about it. And so he's just requesting basically to rezone his property to SFR1. He does have a potential buyer, and so I will mention that potential buyer also may come to rezone for SFR2 or something in the future. I'm not, it's hasn't been formally submitted, but this request is by the property owner. So it is something that, once again, with this rezoning based under the MDO, is that subdivisions, any type of development approvals and stuff are all administrative. So this is the legislative process in that. There is a site plan in your guys' packets for the, for SFR1. Pull it up.
Is the property owner here?
He
tonight?
is.
Okay.
And I'm gonna let him come up here in a sec after I get through the memo. Let's see.
Before we do that, can we ask a couple of questions?
Yeah. I was gonna kind of go a little bit further in the memo, but yeah, kind of getting into the request. So property is, the existing land use is residential. It does have a existing single-family residence on it. The total acreage for the 2 properties together are 5.92 acres. The surrounding land use and zoning, all of the surrounding land uses are residential. The existing land use to the west, which is across the street from Marvin School Road, is common open space / zone civic. It's the Marvin Loop Trail, that portion that the village, strip of land that the village owns. But other than that, it does abut Providence Downs on the east side, which is zoned SFR1, SFR2. So the lot characteristics difference here between RR and single-family residential is basically, if you recall, that rural residential district's a minimum of a 2.5 acre lot. SFR1's about a little under an acre, which is 34,900 square feet. Pretty much the only other difference is the minimum lot width, which the minimum lot width in RR is 144 feet, and the minimum lot width in SFR1 is 130 feet. Tentatively, per the procedure in 5.3, the applicant must hold a neighborhood meeting. It does not have to be prior to planning board, it just has to be prior to the public hearing. And it is tentatively scheduled for September 3rd here at Village Hall. Getting into the, review of the request is that, as I mentioned, the subject property was recommended to be zoned SFR1 when you guys recommended the full Marvin Development Ordinance back in April. That was then changed at the time of the adoption by the Village Council. And this request is basically just kind of getting back, like I said, following kind of the information that prospective buyers as well as the property owner and realtor have been going off of over the past 2 years.
Is there sewer access to this property? And
Kind
if
of.
it is, where is it located?
It would have, so there is sewer across the street and at the rear. For it to be extended, it would have to go through the major subdivision process. It does not have to be extended if this property is minorly subdivided for 3 additional lots, because it is 2 parcels.
So sewer access is across Marvin School Road?
Yes. And water is along Marvin Road on the other side.
Has there been any discussion about the other 3 acres that's contiguous to this property?
The
About
other
rezoning?
3 acres, that property owner, like I said, that one closed, and that one has also came to the village and is going to potentially be submitting a rezoning request as well.
So I'll just say that the reason that we even have the RR zoning is to preserve. And this is exactly why we did this on these tracks. So, I mean, when you look at a satellite view, I know there's livestock on a property just a couple of properties down in this same strip. And from my personal experience, there used to be an HOA connecting this strip of homes. I don't know if there still is or not, but
There's not.
there was when I was looking at purchasing one of them, so there were HOA restrictions. But could you tell us, and you probably don't have this now, but most of this looks rural residential when you're looking at it. So there's a lot of land for one home. So if we were being consistent throughout the strip of properties, now all of a sudden you have, a by right 1 acre per home, basically. And then everything around it in this same strip is all, I don't know what the percentage is of acreage to home, but visually it doesn't comply.
So I will mention, like I said, this is the whole, with the adoption of NDO, like I said, this is the process, and I understand where you're coming from. This is kind of, I will say this is a little bit of a unique case since it was on the market and information was provided, and that's why staff is recommending approval to SFR1. The overall intent of that zoning properties, rural residential that have this acreage is to preserve, as well as to have a little bit more control where you don't have properties going for sale like this and then being carved out just to be squeezed as much as possible, where we didn't really have that control prior. With this one, like I said, if the rezoning is approved by the village council, therefore then it could be subdivided as long as the proposed lots do comply with the SFR1 minimum lot standards. Based off the raw acreage of this and the minimum lot size, it can get a total of about 7. But once again, that's just based off raw acreage. There's still minimum lot width, And then you have to then consider setbacks, so you have to look at, your building area, which having a minimum lot width of 130 feet, you have plenty of area to obviously to do it. And then to create typical lots, it's roughly, that's why the sketch on your guys' monitor is what most likely it would look like, because that's at 130 feet and all having road frontage, because once again, for a minor subdivision, you're not extending public infrastructure. It's 8 or less or total lots. It also has to abut already a approved public street. For any of if they were to add a street, if they were to extend the water and sewer, they would have to go through the major subdivision process. It's still similar to, it's still an administrative review, but per the new MDO, you guys do have that site plan and construction document courtesy review. So, I mean, obviously you would know about it, but minor subdivisions would just be a final plat that village staff would sign off on.
In essence, this gentleman should be given the same consideration as, or this couple, as the Weddington Chase wanting to do theirs, in the way I look at it, because their Weddington Chase was changed, and they want to reverse or go back or whatever they're doing. And this is the same instance.
I don't.
I'm wondering, are they being charged, or are they having to pay for this process?
They paid, yes, they paid for the fee and go through the normal process just as any other
I don't
potential
agree with
applicant.
that. I don't agree that they have to pay for it when they're trying to get the zoning back to what it was before, whenever they had their property on the market, the way it's been for however long, 25 years or 30 years.
The only reason that the first rezoning request that you guys reviewed back in June was waived is because council made that decision. This was, like I said, the applicant or the owner submitted the application, paid the fee, just like in any other normal circumstances.
And so we're not charging the fee to the Weddington Chase and homeowner. Is that correct? For their rezoning?
That's a staff-initiated rezoning.
The big rezoning is a staff
No,
initiated.
where the homeowner initiated it.
Not necessarily, no.
The homeowner came in and initiated wanting it to be rezoned.
And he was turned down.
He was turned down, but he then persisted.
He received a waiver from the village council,
That's right.
because he brought his concerns up during the public hearing of the adoption of the MDO.
I'm not, like I said, I'm not sure what the similarity is here. I'm trying to just focus specifically on this request, and have this discussion with the board, so. Is there any questions?
This is a slippery slope.
Just recall, I understand where you're
I
coming.
understand that they didn't know they had it on the market, they took it off the market, I get it, but at the same time. It's been advertised. But, ignorance. I understand, and every time I see it, I'm like, they can't subdivide that down to what they're saying.
Like I said,
It's not about whether someone's paying attention to legislation and us changing rules and laws, right? It's about preservation. It's also about, is this gonna be consistent with the rest of those properties? And right now, it looks like no. As well as if we, even though you said they have special circumstances,
How are you saying it's not going to be consistent with the other properties?
look at the other properties.
The properties behind them.
Yes, but this strip of land has always been rural, always.
But it's on a busy road.
And,
I've got
but this is all about preservation, Will. And this is the reason that we did this, was to preserve the open space. And then what, every single person that has been designated RR is gonna come in and ask for a rezoning, every single one. So what is the point of us doing our zoning if we're just gonna say, please, feel free, we'll just revert back?
I think it's a certain distance outside the main area of Marvin is more of a preference of reservation.
I will like to invite the property owner and applicant up and let him just kind of go through, why this is being requested. As I mentioned, from a staff level, I, completely understand and agree with why this was done and why we have the rural residential district. But this is in my opinion, a special circumstance with it being on the market, as well as with it being off a major thoroughfare and so on. That does, in my opinion, kind of play in. That's also why this sketch that you see here has one driveway, a shared driveway. Because once again, we are trying to limit the amount of driveway cutouts and so on those major roads. But at this time, Thomas, when you want to come up and just kind of speak about the overview of. Yes. Providence Downs is behind the property, and then that's Marvin Creek across the Joe Carr Road.
Just want to say that I've seen you mow that property many, many, many times, and you have labored very hard over the years.
Yes, sir. I've been here on that property for probably 40 years, before the town of Marvin was even here. Honestly, never planned on leaving. I always thought that would be our place to stay, but circumstances have changed. So we did put it on the market a year and a half, 2 years ago. And several builders, people contacted and were asked about dividing it. Everyone was told it was 1 acre lots, could be subdivided. We took it off the market. In November, we changed realtors, so we left it off the market from November until May, which I believe is when the rezoning changed. We were never sent any information saying that it was being zoned differently. We did not find out about it until recently, till a builder actually put in an offer that we were going to accept, and that's when we found out it needed to be different zoning. So that's the reason for the request. I personally just don't see what the reasoning for not going back to the SF1. Everyone around us is that. I understand what you're saying, preservation, but we were that way before the zoning ever came and changed, so.
And that's the point. We'd like it to stay that way, but I didn't realize that you were not notified of
There
zoning
was never
change.
a letter sent out. Like now, we're gonna send out signs or put signs in the yard. Or so I just want to understand the rules are now. You put a sign in the yard, and neighbors within a certain amount get mails. We never got anything.
And
So if you got notified if you had gotten notified.
We wouldn't have known,
If you had before the vote, you would have
obviously,
gone to the.
just for future, if
planning
we ever wanted to sell, yes. But we never, and that's only how we found out about it, was after the realtor found this time, and actually the King's property that was beside of us, they're going through the same thing. That's how they found out.
Well, I would say that the realtor should have kept in touch with the Department of Planning, in Marvin, but that's beside the point either way, but.
Well, and like I said, to his point is the previous realtor as well as prospective buyers did contact, the village about what the zoning, what the minimum lot sizes and all that was when it was on the market, and it was still zoned R Marvin residential under the old ordinance. Furthermore, to speak on the notification, the reason why, so when the adoption of the MDO and the properties are being rezoned, all properties in Marvin obviously were technically being rezoned to a different classification. Per the state statute, doing any type of massive rezoning like that to cut down on costs of mailings and stuff, you only have to notify the property owners that are not, that per the tax card are not in the circulation of the newspaper where you also advertise. And I completely understand, because I was trying and looking at options where we had these that went from from kind of some not necessarily dramatic changes, because it's still all, they're still all our residential zoning, in short. Obviously, the new districts just have minimum lot sizes and setbacks is the biggest difference. But there was no possible way to potentially mail out every single property owner in Marvin. We tried to do as much as we can with, the open house, as well as the, just information in general on our social media and during our council and planning board meetings. And I know that still is not a way that everybody stays involved. So my apologies on that. And that's, completely understandable on, I'm sure that we would probably had more people here that had questions. So, but I just at least wanted to speak on that behalf.
What we're seeing here in the same one, that's just showing what can be done. That's not what you're.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We
We,
can come back and
Yeah.
put 6,000 square foot home or 7,000 square.
yeah, I have no idea what
This
the,
is not what you're doing. You're just saying, I want to divide it up into 4 1-acre parcels.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's all we're
This,
looking at tonight.
yes, so, once again, under conventional zoning, a conventional rezoning request like this, it's different from conditional zoning. Correct, yeah, there's no site plan tying.
yeah,
So
we're
this
just
was
basically
done,
trying to get back to where we were before the zoning changed on us, so that's,
Yeah, I personally have some sympathy for the applicant, because most of the rezoning was apples to apples. Nothing was changing. And if I had a time machine, I'd go back and notify the 10% of the people that were getting substantively changed and restricted. And in terms of my personal view is in terms of the density, I see a lot of homes really, really close by. I don't, whether 5 more go up or not doesn't personally bother me.
and I agree, and if you look at the zoning map and as a whole in the rural residential properties, like I said, this is kind of a unique case, because some of them are in older subdivisions and are on, 4 to 7 acres, and in theory, the way they're built out, rural residential one fits that characteristic perfectly. It also then does protect those existing subdivisions further. This was a part of I want to say a 7-lot, was it subdivision back in the 80s? I can't remember the plat.
actually, my 2 lots and the old King's property beside me were just 3 lots by themselves. So we're not part of the Marvin Woods or whatever it's on further down. We're just, basically, we're 3 lots by ourselves.
So there were 3 individual lots that were minorly subdivided back prior to the incorporation of the village. So, once again, from a staff level, and I've met with the applicant, and, we told her, this is the process, but it was one that staff is recommending SFR1. If the prospective buyer or anybody in the future that purchases this property wants to do something more, it will come to you, and then this is where I think those discussions will, further, because you are then changing something that wasn't the same as it was a couple months ago. And Ken, I completely agree with you too, is where when we did the rezonings for SFR 1, 2, and 3, a lot of those were apple to apples of existing conditions and all that. The rural residential was kind of the one off, and it was done intentionally that way, but at the same time, you can't predict everything. And I think down the line, if you have a property that goes for sale today and it's on rural residential, I think that's where these conversations definitely get greater into it, because there's on RR now, that's being sold to prospective buyers in theory. And so, if somebody wants to purchase it to develop it, subdivide further, they'd be coming for a rezoning. I also fully expect in other future cases like that, you would also have people probably trying to push the limits and go for SFR 2 or even 3. And it's not necessarily maybe for the density, it's just maybe for weird lot configuration, just because of not having enough road frontage and so on. So that's where you're gonna see probably more of these requests in the future, and more of these discussion conversations that are definitely valid with the point, as well as not maybe fully consistent with the land use plan and everything. But ultimately, as a board, you guys are making a recommendation, and that recommendation goes to council, and they take that into consideration for their approval.
Yeah, yeah.
I've got a question. I'm just curious.
Yes, sir.
I think this, does the sign say 5.85 acres?
Yes, sir.
But this says 5.92.
I'm thinking it's 5.85.
I think it's 5.92 because it's probably not including road right-of-way dedication. So on the tax card, or vice versa, I would have to double check. That acreage was pulled from GIS, which GIS isn't 100% always accurate.
Okay. So you were saying basically, simply, that going to rural residential, even though we have small, large lots, would kind of control those small, large lots from trying to go to a much higher density.
That
and
on-
then keeping them to what
It's
at
not
least
gonna
was
stop them.
before.
Well, that on top of, if you really think about it too, the goal of that is that what we've experienced over the last 3 or 4 years is, in major subdivisions, larger developments, where that's another key into this. And like, yes, like from a rezoning standpoint, I always request that the applicant give as much information, and most of the time too, the prospective buyer is doing the rezoning. And it's because they have a specific plan in mind and a vision in mind, and they're trying to make sure that that plan and vision gets approved. In this case, he's not 100% sure what the prospective buyer is going to be doing, but at least SFR 1 does kind of go based off of what the prospective buyer was buying on. If that prospective buyer closes and wants to do something further, once again, he can submit a rezoning request for something else then.
That's a gravity fed or a gravity sewer just across the road? I figured that would be.
Yes, but your current house is on the
Yeah, I'm
septic.
on septic.
You're on septic right
Yeah.
now, aren't you? Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Or for the applicant? You're good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is it in there?
I'll recommend approval of zoning map amendment 2024-3 and find that the proposed zoning map amendment is consistent with the recommendation and goals of the Village of Marvin 2020 Land Use Plan and other officially adopted village plans and is reasonable and in the public interest.
Second.
And all in favor? I am a no, but only because please let me finish. I think the rezoning is the job of the developer, and because this gentleman is rezoning now, it is just setting the motions forward, and I believe the developer should be coming to us with their plan so that we can actually look at it before it is rezoned, so
I know that.
it still passes, but
I know, and I'll mention, like I said, is that from the conversation with the property owner, is that it is his understanding that the potential buyer does want to zone to SFR2. And his initial request was to zone to SFR2. And I recommended that we go with SFR1 because at least that's what it was prior. And not having that information of what the development would potentially look like for SFR2, put that onus on the applicant, but then at least it doesn't mess with their buyer agreement from what, like I said, what the old regulations were. So it was scaled back, and that was intentional.
But my thoughts are, since it's so soon after this has been done, I agree with what you say. As it goes forward, later, developers going to have to come, definitely. But right now, excuse me?
But ignorance cannot, first of all, we should have notified these folks. That is very unfortunate that they had no idea, so, because maybe it would have been different, but I think this is a very slippery slope.
I'll touch base with you guys tomorrow, but you guys are good, and we'll move forward with the neighborhood meeting and all that. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Neighborhood meeting is notify, all properties within 1,600 feet. Yeah, so like I said, this request came in, a little over a week ago. And we met with the applicant last week to kind of go through the pre-application, making sure that they understood what the process was. And so I didn't pull all the information for that, but their neighborhood meeting we did schedule a tentative date. Those mailings will go out this week. And they'll have to hold that before the public hearing. So as long as the notice is sent out this week, then council will call for a public hearing next week for their September meeting, and that's when it will be considered.
Moving on to discussion recommendation of CZ 2024-1 Marvin Grove 2.
Okay. So once again, this was on your guys' agenda last month, a very preliminary kind of presentation. Some of the questions and comments received by the board have been then incorporated into some of their updates. So before I turn it over to the applicant, I'm just going to kind of go high level. Staff has not finished their full detailed staff report because there were some other minor revisions that came out of some just council comments and feedback that the applicant wanted to incorporate into their submittal. So planning board can make a recommendation tonight. It's not, staff's not recommending it because we still want to, the one item I don't have in your guys' packets is the draft development agreement. But that, all those final details are being worked out, and if the recommendation's tabled, then all that will be provided for you guys in September. So ultimately, as you guys recall, the village has received a rezoning application for the historic trust property, aka the Crane Store property. It was submitted by Zepsa Capital, which did the rezoning last year for the Marvin Grove development. Basically, this zoning request is to amend their original rezoning to incorporate the 2.5 acre tract, the historic trust tract, as part of their overall development. Their submittal, or their updated submittal, basically adds an additional 2 buildings, same footprint and square footage as the other 2 that are proposed in phase 1. So it's a total being added of 20,000 for a grand total, including the existing house, the 2 additional buildings and commercial kitchen, for a total of 41,550 square feet of commercial retail space. The site also has increased parking from the original proposal. The proposed parking is at 116 total spots. I know I mentioned at the last meeting that when we adopted the MDO and incorporated in the Marvin Heritage District language from the previous form-based code, I truly thought at that time where we had the parking information or parking requirements, that we just had it reference Article 12. I was wrong. So it's still technically, for the Heritage District, does not have minimum parking. Let me just explain this for a minute, though. With that being said, the Main Street District, if you recall, is what was originally, when Rick was going through the draft, was what was kind of intended to be the Heritage District. In Article 12 of the MDO, there is a section in there that basically says parking reduction to Main Street can be reduced up to, I think it's roughly 50% of the required parking for like 2 or 3 of the highest use, whatever, however it reads. as long as that the applicant can demonstrate that the hours of operation of the uses aren't going to necessarily overlap to create parking conflict. It's also intended where, once again, you think of a downtown, your Main Street or mixed-use developments that it's walkable, you're parking in one area and going to multiple shops or developments. And so what staff did is then took the uses in Article 12. The minimum of those uses is roughly one space for 350 square feet. This is not including the restaurant. For that, and based off the square footage that's being provided, they would have to provide 114 spaces. So they,
Just for the restaurant or just or total?
for total square footage. And that's, Article 12 has, that's using the office and the retail minimum parking. Restaurant's a little difficult to calculate, but like I said, restaurant is basically calculated at, it's like one parking spot for every 4 seats and an additional parking spot for every like 5 employees. We don't obviously have that information right now, so it's very hard to calculate. And once again, this is just using as a baseline because it's not necessarily something you have to tie to their submittal because the Heritage District does not have minimum parking. That 114 is what rough calculation of what would be required, and then they could still, in theory, if this was a Main Street zone, still have a 50% reduction of that 114. So, in short, staff believes that the provided parking is sufficient and meets the minimum for all those uses. And like I said, even though there is not a minimum parking in the Heritage District, I know this came up during Phase 1. I know this came up during the neighborhood meetings. Staff does feel like it is sufficient for this type of development. Any questions on that?
Yeah. Do we know now how much is retail, how much is office, and how much is restaurant? Because
No.
if you just do the parking right now, and you're saying 40,000 square feet, you only know 3 to 1.
If there, that's based off of one space for every.
Restaurant takes up much more. So I know the parking is just insufficient. We don't have on-street parking that I've seen.
So that's what I'm saying though, is like, technically per the ordinance, when you look at using another zoning district as a kind of a similar kind of criteria, which is that Main Street district, which we don't have any properties on Main Street, but that was what the Heritage District was originally kind of supposed to be. There is a section in Article 12 that says Main Street District properties, or property, development zone Main Street can request a parking reduction up to 50% of their required parking if they demonstrate that the uses, with their hours of operation and everything. Their vision for this site is basically the second level to be medical, more office type use, 9 to 5, with the bottom being more retail, so those hours will vary as well as in the restaurant. Not sure if you guys have a plan for the restaurant on hours, but with that being said, taking that calculation, they do technically meet the minimums for those outside of the restaurant, but even if you then take that 50% reduction of the 114, that knocks you down to 77. Whatever the calculation for the restaurant is not going to be more than 77. I can tell you that.
But how can you calculate, how can you demonstrate that you meet the requirement for the 50% reduction if you don't even know who's going to be moving into these spaces? I mean, just because you want the upper floors to be medical or whatnot doesn't mean that you're actually going to lease to those folks. So,
Well, like I said, from my experience and staff's opinion is that, one, they're not going to have a development that doesn't have enough parking for their potential tenants. That's not,
They already do.
what do you mean?
It's 40,000 square feet, and they have 114. It's already insufficient.
I'm letting you know, based off my research, looking at our ordinance, and I did this even for Phase 1 and looking at a whole bunch of other ordinances, that they were right. Yes, it's right at the minimum, but they were at the minimum of all those ordinances, which is sufficient in my mind.
Can I ask a question about the Main Street? Why, I don't remember this when we were redoing the MDO, like, why exactly would we give a 50% reduction in parking for Main Street? Because we don't have on-street parking, like, we're not set up like Waxhaw, so why is that even?
It's mainly though, and it mirrors the intent of the Heritage District, where this district is intended to be walkable. It's intended to be where, you know, when it's fully built out, that you park at one and you have the ability to walk to others. And, you know, when I was saying walk earlier, it's for residents to be able to walk. So
Don't have the infrastructure for residents to walk.
it's all part of the plan. There will be, for this specific development, there will be infrastructure in place. Because the Marvin Loop at the front is basically scheduled at the same time as their construction. And then it does have a pedestrian connector to the preserved greenway being proposed at the rear as well.
You're saying by the time they open up, the sidewalks will be complete in the Heritage District?
Yes. Because that project is slated for construction in, what year is it, 24? It'll probably let in the winter of next year or spring of 26. So, but once again,
I just think that you keep referring to the Main Street, they can reduce it by 50%. I think the theory there was parking on Main Street. And that's why you could reduce it by 50%.
Well,
I'm-
the theory was the walkability,
but once again,
you know,
if you guys
everybody loves
recall,
their
even,
cars.
like I said, the form-based code, when it was adopted, and that same language did get incorporated into this, is that there was no minimum parking standards in the first place. And that, the intent behind that is you don't want to have a development that has more parking needed, where then you have more impervious area. You want these developments to have sufficient parking, and, you know, yes, everybody has a different opinion on what that is, and that's understandable. But it's not where then we have, like I said, these minimums that once again, you look at larger developments that have a lot of parking, and it's only ever 50% used for the most part. Now, yes, those are different uses, different circumstances, but that was the intent. Now, I do understand with this being the first commercial development, it's hard to, it's a baseline. With Village Hall here, as well as I'm expecting, like I said, 2 other properties to submit in this area in the next year. I think you will have sufficient parking for it all in the long run.
and there's no possibility of, so sorry, I missed, because I was not here at the last meeting, I didn't get to see the presentation. I've read the notes, but even doing a type of design where the first level is actually masked parking, and it's a 3-story building.
So what?
So doing something like a design where it's a 3-story building and the ground floor is masked parking, so it looks kind of like if you go to
Building height
Waverly or something where it's like, you can't really tell it's a parking.
building height
lot.
comes in from a zoning standpoint, because 35 is the maximum building height, and that's roughly right at, a little over 2 stories. So to have the minimum clearance for even if you did parking under would be probably, 10 feet? And so then you're raising all that, so then the building height would be the concern.
I'm just concerned that if you have, let's say the second floor, like you said, is office, and, those office have, say there's 10,000 square feet of office, and 2 people at each office minimum, that's 20 cars that'll be parked from 9 to 5, all by itself. I'm just overly concerned that this is the first project. Restaurants require, anywhere from 13 to 15 per 1,000 square feet. And we're less than 3 on this whole project. It's just very concerning that y'all are gonna build a 40,000 and there's not gonna be places to park, because this is the first. There's no street parking, there's no walkability. It's just very concerning. You have this very first project and there's no place to park on it. because we hope if it is successful, that creates, then if it is successful, only a certain amount of people can get in. Only 113 people can get in. And a restaurant with a bar, you know, if it's you're gonna have more than those people. So if you can't find a place to park, you don't go. And people, you know, the old Yogi Bear, nobody goes there anymore because it's too crowded. And it's just a very big concern from the way I look at this. This is the very first project. I get it. You want to put as many square footage in there because you've got to make your ROI work. But at the same time, we have, I mean, if we want this to work, we've got to get people in there. And we don't want people sitting there in a parking lot on the office side from 9 to 5 taking up a majority of the parking spaces. Restaurants take up a lot of parking spaces during the lunch hours and the dinners hours. It's just very concerning on this.
So, like, once again, for this discussion, like, it can be, you know, a recommendation. In my opinion, there's not, the proposed kind of site plan and the square footage is right on par, in my opinion. Parking, you don't really have any other available space to do parking, or you're gonna be cutting down trees and all that type of stuff. The site, like, is one thing is that they are preserving some nice canopy trees already on the site, and so that's why the layout is. So it's like, in a way, if you want more parking, then you're going to be cutting down trees. Like, it's, in my opinion, it's kind of a push-pull. But ultimately, one thing that can be potentially considered and discussed as part of their recommended conditions is that some of those hour of operations or some of those spaces be leased. Once again, any conditions have to be mutually agreed upon by the applicant and the village council. But you know, anything that you mentioned here is definitely stuff that can be discussed further with the applicant.
I'm not in favor of telling them when they can operate.
And I agree. I mean, that's hard to determine.
I don't think that's my job. But, I mean, if you're saying the parking fits, go ahead and say it. We'll
Like I
see.
said, from my perspective, it does, and, you know, with conversations with the applicant, and they're looking at this too from their standpoint, is like, they've got to have enough parking to make sure that their businesses, you know, and their tenants are successful there. So I think it does go both ways.
Are you, I'd like for you to clarify, are you saying that this meets the ordinance requirements, or are you saying you actually think they have enough parking? Because there's a difference between having enough parking and meeting the ordinance.
Well, technically, like I said, the ordinance says there's no minimum. So what I'm doing is referencing what I can with how the MDO is written as a kind of a baseline for you guys. And based off of that determination, yes, they do comply with that portion of the ordinance if that was the zoning district they were in. Therefore, that's why, and I did the same thing for the phase one with the 64 parking spots. So technically, they had more, their parking pretty much doubled, and yes, they added basically the same amount of buildings, but you're not adding another restaurant per se there. So their parking actually increased, their parking ratio technically actually increased from what their phase one was, if you think about it. But yes, like, I remember going through for phase one, I looked at 7 different municipal ordinances, looked at their mixed-use district, looked at all this stuff, and on average, the minimum space per square footage was anywhere from 1 space per 300 to 500, depending on the use. And I used a baseline per our ordinance, a minimum of 1 for every 350 square feet.
But we don't technically have the uses yet.
But, I know you don't have it in front of you, but if you go look at the MDO, there is, Article 12 has uses outlined. There are some that, once again, you can't calculate in a mixed-use development like this because you don't know what it is. So you have to use the baseline of there says general office, and then there's general retail, and those minimums are 1 per every 350. So
it doesn't matter. I mean, if there's no parking requirements, there's no minimum parking requirements, it doesn't matter if they build all office or all retail or all restaurant.
And that's what I'm trying to say, but I know that one of the comments from the last meeting, as well as some of the concerns there in the neighborhood meeting, and so I'm just trying to provide some clarification and some data back onto why staff does feel like this is sufficient.
I'd like to hear, I mean, these are all legitimate concerns. I'd like to hear the developer's perspective, because at this point, they're going to be spending a lot of money, and they control the tenant mix at the end of the day. And the tenants also vote with their money. They're not going to want to move into a shopping center where they feel they can't, their customers can't get to them. So I think they've got a strong incentive to balance that. And we're kind of speculating because we don't know the tenant mix right now.
Well, and that's
I mean,
also,
but it's legitimate concern theoretically, but
I absolutely agree with you, but at the same time, it's like, because of the Heritage District setup, we're supposed to know all of this up front. Like, that is the,
Well, you-
up front, we're not voting on anything today. We're right.
But at the same time, like, and Kelly, I understand where you're coming from, but there is no take Marvin Gardens, for example. There's no way to know what every single use in a multi-tenant building is going to be. Their anchor tenant
but they
is
have
their
sufficient,
restaurant.
but they have a ton of parking.
And-
I
and-
mean, that's a,
How?
I mean, if you do it well, you have retail, we're only allowed this many retail because we have parking, you have to divide it up according to the parking if there were parking requirements. If we're having a restaurant, we've got to have this much. If we're having retail, if we're having office, so sure there is. Absolutely. I mean, when you build something and you're building 10,000 square feet and the parking's 5 to 1, you need 50 parking spaces. So you can't put a restaurant in there because of that, because the restaurant requires 13. So you sure can, and you should. You absolutely should know.
I mean, honestly.
I don't agree.
We just want this to be successful, so it's not dogging it because we're against the project. It's just, this has to work. And we know you want it to work as well because you're the ones putting up the
Like
money,
Ken
so.
says, it's
But
not
if you
our
want-
money.
Can we invite them
It's
up?
theirs.
Can you guys come up? Would you guys come up and? Are you on?
I think I am. Yep, there we go. Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Board. My name is Matthias Young. I'm a land use attorney with Johnston, Allison, and Horde. It's good to be,
Sorry, can you just move the mic up just a little bit closer to you?
is there,
It's old ears.
is that good?
Yes, thank you.
There we go. Just start over. My name is Matthias Young. I'm a land use attorney with Johnston, Allison, and Horde. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Zepsa Capital. Also with me tonight are Peter and Brian Zepsa with the applicant team. Do we have clicker for a presentation? Maybe. There we go. Can I go back? Okay. So it might be helpful to just give kind of a quick recap since the last time we were here at the planning board. This first slide just kind of shows an overview of the property location. This is 9904 and 9908 Newtown Road. It's right next to Village Hall. The total acreage on this property is 3.5 acres. And kind of as we've been discussing previously, it's within the Heritage District Small Area Plan. So the two parcels that are the subject of this rezoning are in red next to New Village of Marvin Village Hall. And that is a recommendation for Heritage District commercial-only zoning. And the applicant is proposing what is essentially a commercial village with a mix of uses like retail, restaurant, office, very similar uses to the initial Phase 1, which was approved last year. I do want to make a quick clarification. The total GFA on in the new round of development notes is 49.5, not 41.5. Just quick update there. And since the last time we've been at the planning board, as Hunter said, we had small group meetings with Village Council, and then we took the feedback that we got from the previous planning board meeting as well as the feedback from the Village Council and incorporated that into both the site plan and the updated development notes and standards. Like Hunter said, still working on the development agreement. But as far as the feedback that's been incorporated from the initial planning board meeting and the small Village Council meetings, the applicant has agreed to a walking path and an aerator, walking path around the wet detention pond and an aerator in the pond, as well as adding an extra dumpster to serve the two additional buildings. And I know there there was a quick question at the initial planning board meeting about ADA compliance. I can confirm that all the buildings are going to have elevators, all of the ZEPSA buildings, so that does not include the Crane store itself, that existing building, but all of the buildings kind of on the top half of the site plan and all the additional buildings will have elevators.
Also, if I can step in, with that being said, the actual leasable, usable space of those buildings then does shrink in, which then would change that ratio for parking. I know, but that's the gross floor area, like,
That's all the buildings, including the existing Crane store, so that's, yeah.
yeah.
Right.
So when you add that in, the actual leasable, usable space that the uses will be in will be less.
Thank you for the ADA comment, because, or answer, that's helpful to know. With the handicap parking designations, does that also, because that eliminates, I mean, you can't park in a handicap spot, so what is the
Right, so
percentage of handicap parking spaces, and then how does that reduce your?
Yeah, so quick clarification, there's 112 parking spaces and then 6 ADA. So there's a total of 6 ADA parking spaces on the site. But as you all previously discussed with Hunter, per Article 8 of the MDO, the Heritage District itself doesn't have a minimum parking requirement. And do just want to give a quick kind of follow-up to the back and forth that's been going on. Even including the restaurant, if you were to apply the same parking requirements as the Main Street District, which again, the Heritage District has no minimum parking requirement, but if you were to, in the future, apply the Main Street parking requirements, the development would exceed the minimum parking requirements by approximately 20%, and that includes the restaurant.
So let's ignore the ordinances, because they're a little bit wacky, to be honest, so I'm surprised it slipped it. But as business owners, right, because you guys develop and then you don't turn around and sell it, you actually run it, correct? Right. Yeah, I can't wait till the pizza place opens on Old Pineville. So my question is, do you really feel that this is the parking is setting you guys up for success, and the leasees?
So, when we started this whole thing, it was always.
I know, I'm gonna make you come up to the mic, because it's a recording thing, it's not so much us. Oh, you're gonna.
Hello? So when we started looking at this in the beginning, it was always said, we don't want another Stonecrest, we don't want another Blakeney, we don't want another, Marvin Gardens over here. And this is supposed to be a quaint little walkable, grab a coffee, read a book, sort of inner city little something. And that's what we've really tried to do here. Is it tight? Yes, it's tight. Is it South Park Mall parking? Absolutely not. Will some people be mad because it might be not have a spot? It might happen. We think it's doable. We think that we're going to push hard. Like we said, we can't guarantee who's going to come in here in a year and a half or whenever we're ready to lease places here. But we're going to push hard to have some 9-to-5s and some nights and some people that are only weekends and whatnot throughout all of it. We've tried to spread the parking out all around the areas. Like someone mentioned earlier, we've kept a lot of green space here that we could have turned into parking, but we didn't want to do that. And there's some amazing trees. There's a magnolia on there that's been around for probably 100 years at least back there. And that's it, We're running the restaurant. That's us. If it's not successful because of parking, that's totally our fault. We hope to have tenants that are, able to have clients come and available parking. And it's a very fine line. It's a very fine line with all of this. But we have, looked at other projects and traveled all over this state looking at different areas and different little inner city type developments like this. And it's a lot like this, Oh, I didn't even know that there was these spots hidden behind this building over here, or things like that. Not just one giant parking lot in the front and then go into the Target or the Harris Teeter or whatnot. That's what we were trying to do here.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And I think to follow up with that, that kind of vision really does fit solidly within the Heritage District Small Area Plan. I mean, one of the primary driving goals of creating the Heritage District was to create this walkable, seamless kind of village center where you could start at the village hall and walk through commercial into mixed use and then out to residential. And, you know, kind of like we've discussed, by virtue of being the first development, sure, there might not be, you know, it's being the first one's always hard. But if you don't start somewhere, the vision for their Heritage District is not going to kind of really blossom into what the Village Council and that long-term planning is really looking for.
Maybe get a cross-parking agreement with the village.
Well, and that's, yeah, I mean, that is part of this. But what staff will do as once we get their, you know, their final stuff in our staff report for next month, I will put in Marvin Gardens, like minimum parking, and just show compare and contrast, and I'll try to break down to the Article 12 for you guys, so you can, in the report, so you guys can compare. But like I said, from a staff level standpoint, we believe it is sufficient, and it's right on par for where it should be. So can we move on from parking for a sec?
Okay, I think my point's made.
And sorry to jump in, I just kind of want to hit a few other key points too, is as mentioned, the green space requirement, there is a lot of existing trees being preserved. In your guys' packets, I think I did include a tree survey. I have requested that they at least kind of show an overlay, just kind of overlaying so you'll see what trees are being removed. They will be mitigated through the buffer that will be planted, additional plantings along that 20-foot buffer, as well as the evergreen screening along the 5-foot between the church. But ultimately, in phase 1, there was a total of about 25% like open space, buffer, greenery, as well as taking in the pedestrian kind of corridors and plazas for a total of 41 open space, open usable space per se in phase 1. With phase 2, that even goes further, specifically for the phase 2 property, it's a total of 60%, and 49% of that, or about almost 50% of that, is grass buffer, as well as, I mean, they're ponds. So they are exceeding preservation and open space requirements that is required for the Heritage District. Did I hear you say you guys are adding a walking trail around the pond?
Yes, so there will be a walk, it's kind of, you can kind of see it on that site plan, it's like a little ring. There'll be a walking trail around the wet detention pond. And then just some quick clarification, while we're on the topic of the detention pond, that is going to be, it's going to have water year-round. So it is both a stormwater BMP, but it's also a water feature for the property. Yes, fountain or aerator in the pond. That is in the development notes now. So that's another really kind of amenitizing that wet pond, and it'll be connected to water. So if there is a drought or a dry spell, the pond will still have water in it. It'll still have the aerator, and there'll still be the walking trail.
Which, to add to that, with that walking pond and making that a recreational feature, that is also allowed to be counted towards their minimum open space requirement per the Heritage District. So, I'll let you go back over.
Did you have any other?
What'd you say?
Oh, did you have anything else?
No, I was kind of, like I said, I'm just hitting on high level overview stuff. And then if you guys recall, and I know it's in the presentation, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping ahead. I'll just let you go back and I'll jump in.
So yeah, that's a quick overview of kind of the feedback we've incorporated from the initial planning board meeting and the small village council meetings. As you all are kind of parsing through these development notes, do want to help clarify some of the terminology we're using. I know at the initial planning board meeting, we talked about phase 1, phase 2. We have kind of changed that terminology a little bit. So as you all are looking at the development notes, just want to help you out here. So this is what used to be called phase 1. That's the initial portion of the property that was rezoned last year. When you're looking at the development notes, that is going to be referred to as Tract 1A. And then anytime in the development notes you see a reference to Tract 1B or new Tract 2. So 1B and new Tract 2 are what at the last planning board meeting we were calling phase 2. So this is the portion that's being rezoned from SFR1 to HDCO. Tract 1B is the portion of that property that ZEPSA is going to retain ownership of after the transaction. And then new Tract 2, best way to think about that is it's the Crane Store property. It's the portion of that big parcel that the Marvin Trust is going to retain ownership of. So just giving you a heads up there as you're looking through those development notes so you can kind of keep track of which tract is where and which note applies to what. But going on to kind of some cross sections and elevations. So we've prepared, like kind of was talking about, we have buffers against both the residential to the rear of the property and then the civic use to the side. Kind of starting with the civic use, that's the left cross section if you look on the screen. And this is really a cross section of what it would look like if you were standing basically on the property line between Marvin Grove and then the church. So you can see on the church side, you've got an amount of existing vegetation, and then right on the property line, there's going to be a 7-foot wood fence, and then on the ZEPSA side, the Marvin Grove side of that property line, there will be evergreen screening, and then on the right side, that is a cross-section. Again, if you were standing right on the property line between the Marvin Grove property, and then to the right, you can see the walking trail that kind of runs from Village Hall back around in between the Marvin Grove property and then the preserve. So on that property line, again, 7-foot tall wood fence, and then row of evergreens and vegetation, and that's all on the Marvin Grove property. And then once you hit that property line, that's also when you hit the kind of existing vegetation and that walking trail.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
The one with the, over at the church where you have the side yard,
Mm-hmm.
you have new building. Is
Right.
that going to be the same where the existing structure is?
Yeah, so
is that
the
gonna fit
closest,
within that existing structure?
yeah, maybe we can go back to the site plan a little bit. Yeah, so you can see, this is kind of a better view. This is the original colored site plan from phase 1. But if you look at kind of the top uncolored part of that site plan, you can see, so the Heritage District has 5-foot minimum side yard. So that is the distance between the property line and then, yeah, that building just down from there, that's the existing Crane house.
I guess as that house kind of turns a little bit at a slant, also helps that with.
Right, and of course, it's all, you know, we're complying with the minimum side yard requirements of the zoning district, but that's kind of, if you were standing on that property line, so there you've got the 5-foot side yard on the Marvin Grove property side, and then that's where that existing Crane house is. And then right on the property line, there will be a 7-foot tall wood fence.
And just also for clarification, one of the additional buildings, or that was part of phase 1, so the one right behind the existing house and the commercial kitchen sits 14 and a half feet off that property line, so it's even further. So if you were to go back to the site plan or that overview, you can see it's a little bit further from the existing property line. So once again, the existing house was there. It was 5 feet off then, and that's where, it's not being moved, so but it still complies with the Marvin Heritage District for the minimum setbacks.
So that's the cross sections, kind of, we just wanted to be able to illustrate the buffering that the applicant's providing. And then did want to touch on the elevations real quick. So these are the elevations for the 2 additional buildings, and that's going to be, I'm going to use our new terminology, the 2 new buildings going on tract 1B. This first building, after some small group village council feedback, we're looking at potentially a change to the color palette of this. So that'll be coming through potentially in the next submittal. But this is the other elevation for the other additional building on tract 1B. And that's kind of the big overview recap from last month, or catch up if you haven't been able to be with us. Both myself and Brian and Peter are available if you'll have any kind of more specific questions.
Is the retention detention pond, is there a minimum? Are the dimensions of that like based on?
Our stormwater ordinance, yes.
Yep, okay.
I've had multiple conversations with their engineer. Our stormwater ordinance is above and beyond the state minimum when in regard.
Well, with the amount of rain that we get,
In
it's probably a good
in
thing.
regards to when you develop the basin and the size of the basin required, it's contingent upon them providing drainage calculations for multiple storm events. We have, I'm not looking at it, so don't quote me on this, but I know we have at least 2, if not 3 more storm events that have to be calculated into their drainage calculations, which does make the basin larger. And I think one of those is, I think the state's minimum requirement is maybe the maximum event's either 50 and ours is 100. So like, once again, a 100-year event is obviously, pretty significant. So as well as the basin has to be, basically they take the pre-development drainage pattern, meaning any properties that abut it that currently based off grade and all that flow to that, they have to take that into consideration for their, and then their output would be then whatever their pre-development drainage patterns and runoff were, their post-development has to meet that or be less than. So, and all that will be part of the engineering. In this case, they already had phase 1 approved and we're working on engineering, and then went under contract, track 1A, and went under contract with the Historic Trust and are already in the process of obviously doing engineering for the whole site. So all that's already kind of been calculated into what you see on that site plan should be kind of based, be exact to what is required per ordinance.
Just out of curiosity, the neighborhood that's behind it, is that little corner lot that abuts the village hall, is that going to be developed? Has it already been developed? Google Maps.
The one in
tends to be
front,
a year or 2 behind sometimes.
between the roundabout and that, or are you talking on the backside?
Like this property right here in the corner of the.
No, that's common open space
It's common open.
of the preserve, yep.
I wasn't sure if they had enough frontage to actually put a lot, like to put a house
Yeah,
there.
no, it's dedicated as common open space for the preserve plot.
Is that disturbance, is that supposed to be like the trail that's supposed to be going in there? That,
That little corner
in your
piece.
packet, if you look at the satellite, there looks like there's some sort of,
Yes, so there is a power easement that you actually can see on the site plan at the very bottom. I think it's a 50-foot power easement. Our trail that here at Village Hall does cut into this property and then tie into the preserve trail. And so that's what that brown shading is, as well as mentioned, they will connect, if you guys recall during phase 1, or the original rezoning, I'm gonna have to get used to that, I'm sorry. The rezoning from last year for the original track had the trail connector roughly, on their property, which was behind some of the residential zone, some of the properties in the preserve. Now you're moving that ingress egress for pedestrian access actually closer to Village Hall and away from residential properties. Yes, the trail's still back there, and yes, you'll have pedestrian traffic in theory, but you're not going to have that direct, connected directly there behind it. So that was another thing that did come up during the neighborhood meeting. If you guys recall, during the rezoning last year, it was recommended that that little connector piece not be built, and we get an easement. Council requested that it just go ahead and be built. So that's still what they're proposing as well as this. They're just moving the connection point.
So the connection point is going to be where now?
Right here, roughly. Right? Is that what we?
So it will not go into the neighborhood?
Well, the trail already does go in the neighborhood. Basically, Village Hall sits here. If you walk right out these doors and go left, you're walking on the trail, and then you come to a T, which goes to the cul-de-sac. What cul-de-sac is that?
Right, okay.
Yellow Jasmine, which is in the preserve, and then the trail continues in it. That trail wraps around the whole neighborhood, as well as it connects with the preserved portion that is off of Marvin Road, Golden Bell. So you would have those connection points. They also are dedicating an easement along the frontage / part of their original conditional zoning, constructing that portion of the loop, which we'll get into further conversation about that during, like I said, the full staff report next month. So you'll have multiple ways for pedestrian access here, as well as pedestrian access here to Village Hall and the churches and adjoining neighborhoods.
And remind me, sorry, no, it's been a while since we've seen this, the initial plan for Track A. Did I say that correctly? Yeah. Track A, okay. The back left corner that looks like it's supposed to be connecting to the church property, is that actually going to connect?
At this time, no. The requirements of the Heritage District in Article 8 does require cross-access stubs for future development, even though that's the church property, and it's part of the requirement. And that's the same where it is down here. Where's my mouse? Where'd it go? Down here. In theory, if we ever wanted to connect it from our parking lot there's a lot of hurdles to jump through, so I don't ever foresee that happening, especially with having pedestrian access, but that's why those are kind of cross-stubbed, just because it is a requirement of the ordinance.
So those will just be closed off?
Yeah.
In some way?
Yeah, it'll be just like a normal, stop.
Yeah, like a stub out, so the,
I'm sorry, there were so many people talking.
it's okay.
What's it going to
Yeah, I
look
got
like?
it. So, I don't know if we can see an example of it on maybe the aerial, but I guess the site plan works. So, right, there will be curb right along the edge of that, and the curb will just continue along. And then if that stub's there just, A, because it's required by the ordinance, and then if cross-connectivity ever became a thing, then you would just take the curb out and continue that aisle along.
And also to mention, I can't remember if I did mention this last time, the original rezoning for the original track, their proposal did have, because once again, they did not have a stormwater pond, they were still required to manage stormwater on their site, and so they were proposing to do, a fine crushed gravel and infiltration system. This will all be paved, and it will have, your curbing, it will have the drop inlet drains, all go into their stormwater pond. So it is a cleaner on that end and with the infrastructure.
Is there some sort of setback from the pond to the parking? I'm just saying there's like a little bit more space there that you could squeeze some more parking spaces. I normally wouldn't say that, but I'm like a little nervous about the parking.
No, but the grade, I think
don't
is
know
part
what
of,
the
the
grade is, 'cause
grade
isn't
down
it-
there is really, I mean, because everything's, this track right here is the village track, it's about half an acre.
I mean, like right here.
From the top of the roundabout to about right there is about roughly 12 feet in drop pretty significantly. And there is a swell and drainage easement that runs in between these two properties, so somewhat is grade. That's something that we can look at, but I feel like what I recall in discussion with the applicant as well as the engineer is that's part of the reason, as well as maybe the power line cutting over. No, I think it goes further back, but we can look at that and potentially be an option to maybe get a few additional parking spots.
Since I see my pastor in the audience, I was wondering if there's any concerns from the church that you might want to speak about?
The only questions we were watching is a couple of things. One is with your conversations about parking, which we have a parking lot that's going to be right beside the yellow house. How are you going to protect us? Because that sets us up to become the bad guys. If people start parking there, we can't use it. All of a sudden, we're the ones having to deal with law enforcement or whoever. We become the bad guys to the neighborhood. To the community that, we have a counseling center there, we have life groups meet there, we have support groups meet there, scouts meet there, it's an active church. Because there's also a setback, I understand, from church property to an alcohol restaurant as well, of about 50 feet, and I didn't know how that fits. But our concern right now is the parking, because once you put that sidewalk in, that I know we're coming to meet with you guys on Thursday, our parking is closer to their restaurant than their parking is to theirs. So if you're coming to the restaurant, where are you going to park? And we just don't want to be the bad guys. We don't want to be bad neighbors, and all of a sudden, the church has no parking signs, the church has towing, the church has whatever. But we're just a little worried. Eva is this is Eva Bender, she's our executive director of operations. We just don't want to be put in a position where now we're the bad neighbors.
Would it be, what about the Zepses be kind of in control of that and put their sign saying towing will be enforced if you park in the church
That
parking
still
lot?
puts the onus.
Well, they can put their names on it too, I mean, but I'm just trying to think of anything that might be able to deter.
We didn't come here to speak, we were here to listen. You asked a question, that's kind of
Well,
when you were talking about parking concerns, avoiding parking will be answered by our parking lot, and that's where we're a little nervous that we're going to become the bad neighbor. We don't want to be, the whole community of Marvin was named after that church, so the last thing we want to do is be the bad neighbor.
absolutely, I agree.
You could also financially benefit. You could put up a little Panthers, parking lot Friday and Saturday nights and charge money, just like the Panthers. Anytime there's an event uptown, it's like $30 for parking, $40 for parking. I'm not suggesting that, it's semi a joke, but at the same time, it's like, no, but I mean, like, there is an opportunity there for you, so if you want some programs funded.
So, thank you for sharing those comments. I will discuss further with the applicant and see if there's any potential proactive measures that can be implemented and, as part of the rezoning. That's always one of those things and I know that the neighborhood behind had similar concerns there too. And it's hard to tell because we don't know what we don't know. We can try to prepare the most for the worst and just see if there's anything that the applicant potentially do to mitigate those potential issues arising.
I'm sorry, the other thing is just pretty obvious. Once we talk about the sidewalk, which we don't have any issues with, but you put a sidewalk from our parking lot, and you're talking about 12 feet to the building. Our parking lot will be the parking lot. And our concern is we do have a counseling center there with therapists, counseling, support groups, all the other things. We just don't want to be the bad guys that, all of a sudden the church is the one that gets the black eye to the community. We just don't want to do that.
Yeah, I just want to say, we want to be good neighbors as well, obviously, and if there's anything we can do to
Lines of communication are open.
Other than that, is there anything, I guess, one, does council have any other comments, questions, feedback? Planning board, sorry, long day.
We just got an upgrade,
We're not
kids.
elected.
You don't want that.
No, thank you.
Well, we do have a council member here, so. But no, is there any, I guess, any additional questions for myself or the applicant, or any additional comments, potential recommendations, feedback that they can look at potentially accommodating into before the next meeting?
I'm interested to see the agreement.
Okay.
But so this is really just a more detailed update. We're not voting today on this because. we
Like I
don't
said,
have
you
all the
guys
pieces.
can, I mean, but if you want to see the full submittal and stuff, then like literally we met last week and they have most of it done. It's just little final minor stuff to make sure the language is correct. And then that gives staff as well as our attorney a chance to review, prepare our full detailed memo and then present it. So it should be kind of a straightforward presentation at the next meeting.
I don't know if there is a way to maybe include, and it might delay the process, so you guys would have to talk with each other, but just, I mean, this is going to be parking is going to be an issue for all of the landowners, business owners, moving forward. So getting a handle on what the agreement is between the neighbors as to how they're going to deal with overflow, whether it's, they have an agreement and you can ask permission if you have like an event or something and they could grant it, I'm not exactly sure, but it would be, in order to make sure everyone stays good neighbors, it would be nice to include some sort of like, what is the understanding about parking in someone else's? Whose responsibility is it to deter that, to, you know what I mean? Because the pastor's fear is real and we don't want, we don't want there to be conflict because we do want enough parking, but
Yeah, a
we
lot
should
of
try
that.
and eke out see if you can eke out any extra parking spaces. I don't know. I know, I totally get what you're saying, like with keeping it like a small town feel, like Duck or like a mountain, like a mountain shopping village. Like I totally understand. But people here like their cars, and that's the problem.
I will mention, in regards to that, like heritage district developments are intended to kind of have shared parking, especially ones that are adjoining. Like, for example, if the neighboring property beside here, Village Hall, goes through rezoning, it'll probably be recommended that we connect parking and have an agreement, just because that's, once again, it's one, you're reducing driveway cutouts on the road, other stuff like, and kind of similar to this. In regards to enforcement of that, it does kind of fall a little bit on the property owner themselves, as well as, but, I think with some coordination with this applicant and future applicants, if this concern, that's where I think it goes a long way as part of their approval in any way that we can get that incorporated in. That's why that development agreement's important, because some of that can go ahead and be outlined there, and we can then, the village can hold them accountable. So
It's nice when you are working with someone like the Zepsa family, because they're going to offer it up, but not everyone is going to be them. And if we set this up correctly out of the gate, we're not going to have as many problems down the road if we bump up against a developer that's not willing to take ownership or responsibility of the traffic issues or the parking issues that they're causing. So thank you for not being jerks.
Just one other point, Hunter, because I know we all want to see this be wildly successful and from our lips to God's ears. What about across the street, doing overflow parking for the people that own that, because that is part of the Heritage
That's
District?
them.
Oh,
It's the same
the church still
Yeah.
owns it across the street? Okay.
No parking during Christmas tree selling season,
Oh, that's the
please,
piece,
or,
okay. Okay.
yeah, that is part of the church property. Like I said, I mean, that's, I'll work with the applicant on that, and as you heard, the applicant's willing to work with the church. So, whatever we can potentially do to, like I said, incorporate that in, we will for sure do that.
Because the church is going to have an issue, I mean, like, because they own both sides of the road, they're going to have an issue with the property that gets developed along, I can't remember the name of the property, the one with the corn,
Ventures.
the Fincher property. They're gonna have an issue with that, and then with this guy. He's probably already a problem. Yeah, yeah. Is that why you go there? Is that why you go to church there? You get some benefits?
All right.
Yeah, sorry, we diverge, I apologize.
We're-
Thank you for your comments and your guidance through this, and anyone have any other last 5-minute questions before we let this young man sit down? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
They don't need to make a motion like table, right? It just,
There's a planner's update, but
okay. So other than that,
planner's update, do you have one?
I'm trying to think. Regarding the Marvin Loop project, staff as well as our engineering firm Dewberry had a meeting last night and is having another meeting tomorrow on Thursday regarding the Marvin Loop. The Marvin Loop project. This meeting's just for the property owners, kind of showing them the current tentative proposed route. It's not the alignment that, like I said, is fully set in stone. This is what we want to get their feedback prior to having the engineers dive into further plans. With that being said, once we finish conducting these meetings and receiving that feedback, our engineers will then kind of, we received some comments last night that actually were very beneficial on certain alignments. So we'll kind of incorporate that in and then probably have a full-scale public meeting. I would tentatively probably say late fall. But that project is moving along. Other than that, unless there's any specific questions on ongoing developments or anything else, that's all I've got.
I just, out of curiosity, did the Baptist church, is it Baptist? White church?
Presbyterian.
Oh, it's Presbyterian.
Thanks.
Oh, my Lord, I'm a Presbyterian too, my goodness. Did they subdivide that property?
So technically, it was never subdivided in the first place. It's a long story.
All right, well, we
If you,
can talk offline, but I just was curious as to why there was a sign.
oh,
that's being posted.
yeah, I can fill you in on that.
Okay.
I mean, in short, with the adoption of the MDO, those properties were zoned civic. That use is a permitted use in the civic district. So therefore, the special use permit that was approved under the old ordinance is not even required. I had this conversation with Rick as well as our attorney. It then got further that their belief is potentially that special use permit was invalid in the first place, meaning that it could have been challenged and potentially overturned, not needed in overall. So therefore, when it was zoned civic, it wasn't really kind of thought about because it was our impression that special use permit to an extent was valid and in place. But with the zoning of civic and that medical office as a permitted use in the civic district, then they have a right to, complying with the terms of the MDO, which does allow signage and all that. That's kind of the short end of it.
So we're now considering them a medical clinic?
It's
I thought they were counseling.
That counts as medical.
It's either way, if you look at the use, counseling or medical office, not like in that table, if you look, and I can show it to you offline, but like in Article 8 in the tables, the three things that we could interpret classifying them as all are permitted in the civic district. So there was, and that, like I said, that was consulted with the attorney as well as Rick on that, so.
Okay, thanks, appreciate it. I was just curious. All right, do we have action items?
No.
All right, then let's go around the room. Sir, would you like to start?
Staff, again, thank you very much for all your work in Plomey. Congratulations. We're Excited for you.
Yes, congratulations. Mike?
Congratulations, thank you, staff.
Congratulations. And I've got an announcement. All right, I am sadly going to have to say that I'm going to have to step down due to some health issues, so this will be my last planning board meeting. But it's been a great time with you guys, and I've really enjoyed it all. But it's something I need to take care of, you know, under some advisement.
Oh, we're sorry to hear that.
Yep. But I wish you guys good luck with everything going forward. You're going to need it.
Yeah.
All right, well, motion to adjourn.
Do I get to adjourn all the time?
Do it, that's your job, that's like your unofficial job, the adjourner. That we have. All in favor? All right, thank you, everybody.